Good morning, 4Bs. Bzzz. This is chapter 6, even though there's a 5 in the title of the chapter. So this is floater number 5 of Lower the Trap, book by, let me think here, Jessica Scott Karrin, Kerrin. Karrin, probably. All right, so there was a floater in Graham's saltwater tub. Floater number 5. And this time, leftover casserole had been dropped into the water. Lynette had refused to eat her supper the night before because she hated the zingy cheese topping. "Lynette," Graham shouted. No answer. "Lynette," he yelled even louder. Still no answer. The only sounds were the whoops and shrieks of kids in the after-school program at the playground and the put-a-put, put-a-put, put-a-put-put of Dad's mint green lobster boat returning home for the day. Graham disposed of the remains with the usual flush and headed straight to Lynette's room. He slipped all her dresses off their hangers so that her entire wardrobe fell to a crumbling heap on the floor by her closet. After the finishing touches, he tossed her prized tiara, which had been hanging from the closet knob, on top of the angry pile. He returned to his room and updated his scientific journal about the latest casualty. Then he dug out his copy of the McDermott article and reread it. Even after carefully studying it, there were no new clues about the lobster's whereabouts, and the photo remained frozen in time. Worry dragged him down like an anchor, and the air in his room became suffocating. A trip back to the backyard would help him, he decided, and headed downstairs. Graham pushed through the mudroom door and wandered across the bumpy lawn to the calamus vine, climbing up his dad's shed. He counted the budding leaves. They took inventory of his familiar landscape. The vegetable garden had just been planted and the rhubarb was already up. The remains of last year's woodpile stood next to the half-dozen lobster traps, stacked neatly and waiting for repairs. A hammock was tied between two crab apple trees where Graham liked to read about oceans far away. He sighed. His surroundings seemed so cramped and ordinary. Graham undid the latch on the shed door and stepped back inside to wrap himself in the cool shade. While waiting for his eyes to adjust to the shadows, Graham took a deep breath and a mixture of linseed oil, diesel, and grass clippings. He gently touched the treasures that his dad had displayed in the shelves, bottles, lead soundings, cannonballs, and above the shelves the nameplate of his dad's first boat had been mounted, the Harmonious, and bought right after he finished high school. Graham's survey turned to the floor of the shed. Unlike the tiny shelves, the floor was hidden beneath mounds of fishing nets, axe handles without axes, a three-legged chair, cans of marine paint, tools soaking in coffee cans fixed with blackened oil, several broken boat radios, wooden floats, rolled up nautical maps, and a rusty tea kettle, two cracked hurricane lamps, the lawnmower, and an enormous lobster pot too big for the kitchen cupboards, which his dad hauled out every year for the family reunion picnic. Graham's eyes rested on the lobster pot. He knew what he had to do. Graham's going to be a marine biologist. He often had Graham heard his dad declare. He often had Graham heard his dad declare these words, so it was obviously imperative that Graham visit Big Fish in person to make that promise come true. Graham would have the means if the gigantic lobster sold at a high price. All it would do was take one kind bidder whose son was in a pickle about a missing cactus. Graham dug out Norris's list of suspects. There were only 2 more names to investigate. Graham had to do his job, and he was going to do it right. On Monday afternoon, Norris planted himself on Graham's front porch rocker once again, still picking away at the scabby elbow, and still wearing that maddening ball cap. "Here I am for my update," he announced. Creak, 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 creak. Fletch was lying unperturbed. Wow, that's a big word for in the morning. Fletch was lying unperturbed. Turbed, unperturbed, nearing in his unusual rug-like position. "Have a look," said Graham, reaching into his pocket and folding his list of suspects. He had crossed off all the names of those whom he had already ruled out. Norris grabbed the list and scanned it, then thrust the paper back to Graham. "You know what I think?" I did not wait for Graham to reply. "You're going to run out of time if you ask me. Norris began to snap his fingers non-stop. "What are you talking about?" Graham shot back, unable to ignore Norris's aspirating hand signal. "There are only 2 names left to investigate, and one of them walks by my house all the time." "Who's Ferguson?" "Yes, Ferguson. I saw him go by just the other day." said Graham, recalling that bat-shaped kite. "Look, here he comes now." Both boys watched as Ferguson rounded the corner and passed below Graham's house, walking at the pace of a funeral march. "Go on then," Norris taunted while jiggling the coins in his pocket. "Investigate, Mr. Science. Don't forget your side of the deal," Graham warned, and he took off down the stairs. "Ferguson," he called. "Ferguson, stop!" He smiled when he saw that it was Graham. "Where are you headed?" Graham asked as they set off together. "I'm going to play table tennis with my granddad," said Ferguson. He patted the paddle that was tucked up in his back pocket. "Is that Norris on your porch?" "Is that Norris on your porch?" Both boys turned to look back at Graham's house. Norris ducked behind the corner of the lilac bush by the front stairs. "Yes, that's Norris," Graham admitted. "I'm dying to know why you're having him around with you," said Ferguson, who resumed walking while Graham marched his sober stride. "You're not the type who likes cheaters." "He cheats?" says Graham, not all surprised. "Constantly," said Ferguson. "He's always trying to copy my answers during spelling tests. I tell him to stop, but, like my granddad says, I might as well flog a dead horse. Norris makes me mad enough to spit feathers." "Jeez Louise," said Graham, secretly pleased to discover that Ferguson had a possible motive as a cactus thief. They walked without comment while Fergus whistled some kind of solemn church hymn and Graham plotted his strategy. I wondered why Mrs. Penfield put him in charge of her plants, Graham pondered out loud, cunningly directing the conversation to the crime scene. Heaven knows, says Fergus. Here's my turn, he added, pointing up the small street that intersected the main one that they were on. But Graham was not quite done with his investigation. I'll keep you company, he offered as he made the turn with Ferguson. They walked for a few more blocks. Ferguson mournfully whistled, and Graham struggled how to keep the conversation alive. Those plants, Graham finally continued. They can't be safe with Norris. Mrs. Penfield was dead wrong to trust him, agreed Ferguson. Plus, like I said, he cheats. Ferguson came to a halt. Well, here I am, Graham said as he expanded green lawn sporting card. 4 flower beds? Sorry, I'll rewind that. Graham saw an expensive green lawn sporting card for flower beds, outdoor furniture arranged in a social grouping, and old people moving about with canes and walkers. Some of them were watching an elderly man flying a bat-shaped kite that made swooping passes on the onlookers below. Graham realized with a jump where they were. This was Lower Spit Narrows Senior Residence. And that's the end of the chapter. So that was chapter 6. Chapter 6. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to predict what might happen in chapter 7. Okay, so I want you to, in your journals today, write a little bit about what might happen in chapter 7. Okay. Why was Graham a little excited to find out where this old folks home or the senior residence, why was he a little excited? There's a reason for it, and I hope that you guys can remember why he'd be excited about, finding where the senior residence was and who lives there that maybe would be interested or interesting for Graham. So that's it, and I'll see you later. Bye for now. Be safe.